Did you know that most consumer LED LCD displays with local dimming can never be color accurate? If you measure most full array local dimming or FALD LED LCDs at different window sizes, you will get different luminance and gamma responses. This is because changing the backlight intensity in itself will alter the grayscale and colors, and most manufacturers either don't have the know-how or don't bother implementing corresponding LUT compensation at different window sizes. Not Sony though. If we measured this Bravia X90L FALD LED LCD using differently sized patterns after calibration, be it a 10% window, 1022 APL, or even full screen, its luminance, grayscale and gamma remained fairly stable, a testament to the amount of work Sony engineers have put into designing its local dimming algorithm. And this is the reason why, despite their flaws, Sony's FALD LED LCDs, including the X90L, are consistently the most accurate among transmissive displays on the market, coming closer than any other brand to faithful reproduction of the creative intent. The 65-inch Sony X90L is equipped with a VA-type LCD panel without viewing angle compensation film, delivering high native contrast ratio of 5500 to 1 when measured on a 4x4 ANSI checkerboard pattern without local dimming enabled. The number of local dimming zones has seen an increase from previous Bravia X90 series LED LCD TVs. We counted 80 independently dimmable zones in an 8x10 grid, though this figure is still comparatively low and won't rock the world of any video enthusiast interested in LED LCD technology. Sony's local dimming algorithm prioritizes image accuracy over blooming suppression, so the Bravia X90L would manifest more blooming or halation artifacts than full array local dimming LED LCDs from rival manufacturers such as Samsung, with light from immediately adjacent bright objects seeping into the letterbox bars which were already grayer in the first place. Sony's approach is not without its advantages though. 1. The X90L preserved more shadow detail than the Samsung QN95C, therefore coming closer to matching the BVM X300 mastering monitor. And 2. Small areas of specular highlights looked brighter and more impactful on the Sony X90L compared to the QN95C, whose local dimming algorithm had to dim down small bright highlights to suppress blooming, even though the Samsung Neo QLED Mini LED TV is blessed with significantly more local dimming zones and higher peak brightness. Talking of which, peak brightness on our 65-inch Sony X90L review sample measured 1250 nits on a 10% window after calibration to D65 white point and 680 nits full fill, injecting impressive HDR impact to HDR10 movies, particularly in high APL sequences. Similar to all Sony TVs we've reviewed so far, the Bravia X90L doesn't adapt its HDR10 tone curve to ST2086 metadata, relying instead on its own dynamic tone mapping algorithm to map all types of HDR10 content to the screen's capability. Just make sure that the HDR tone mapping control is left at the default setting of Gradation Preferred, since selecting the off value would deactivate dynamic tone mapping and clip more bright highlights in 4000 nit HDR10 movies. All things considered, the dynamic tone mapping algorithm on the Sony X90L was fairly well judged to reproduce the creative intent, so much so that we actually preferred watching 4K Blu-rays in HDR10, rather than in Dolby Vision, which we measured to be slightly dimmer in peak nits. The local dimming would be deactivated under the hood whenever the UI was on screen, leading to grayish blacks and visible backlight uniformity on the Google TV home screen and during the loading sequences of streaming apps. Don't worry, this is normal behavior for Sony LED LCD TVs, and the local dimming function would be restored once you start playing the actual content on screen. Even with motion flow disabled, the Sony X90L correctly performed 4:4 pull-down to present 24 frames per second movies accurately without telescenic judder. For 50 FPS or 60 FPS material, Setting motion flow to custom and then bumping the smoothness value to at least 2 would boost motion resolution from the sample and hold baseline of 300 lines to around 600 lines. Engaging the clearness setting would increase the intensity of backlight scanning. But because there seemed to be no further improvement in motion resolution despite a dimmer picture, we decided to keep the setting off. While Sony's motion processing remained as polished as ever, the Japanese brand still doesn't separate its motion flow settings into low frame rate and high frame rate interpolation. So if you use the smoothness control to reduce motion blur when watching sports, you will also be introducing soap opera effect or SOE and interpolation artifacts to 24p content. By default, motion flow was set to custom and film mode to high for the internal TV apps which operate at 60Hz on Sony televisions including the X90L, necessary to extract 24p cadence from Netflix or Disney Plus movies. Otherwise, there would be noticeable telecinic judder in slow panning shots. However, when watching 50Hz broadcast material with mixed edits, film mode high would lead to occasional microstutter and tearing artifacts, which thankfully could be resolved by switching film mode to low. The good news is that the picture settings on Sony TVs can be saved independently per source, allowing you to apply the correct motion settings for various types of content on different inputs. Upscaling was very good, with this SMPTE RP133 test card in 576i appearing clean and detailed without excessive noise and fizziness, translating to beautiful presentation of high-definition real-world content. Even bit-stuffed standard def broadcast won't look as noisy and grubby as on lesser TVs. Our 65-inch Bravo X90L review unit exhibited less dirty screen effect and bending than rival LED LCDs we've tested this year, with some vignetting along the borders of the screen owing to the narrower viewing angles of VA-type LCD panel. Another strength of Sony TVs, including the X90L, is native 10-bit gradation. Even with smooth gradation disabled, there is less posterization in the skies of the Martian than any other non-Sony LED LCD TV we've seen in 2023. Interestingly, the smooth gradation control appeared to be fairly heavy-handed, smudging some fine detail even on the least aggressive setting of low, so we prefer disabling it for watching pristine content such as 4K Blu-ray. Otherwise, SDR color accuracy was superb after calibration, with an average delta error of below 1 on this color checker SG chart where 140 patches were measured, and no inaccuracies exceeding the humanly perceptible threshold of delta error 3, translating to cinematic colors in real-world viewing. For HDR, DCI-P3 color gamut coverage reached 96% in UV terms, whereas Rec 2020 coverage was 73%, which is as expected for an LED LCD TV using PFS phosphor. Surprisingly, the PFS phosphor LCD panel actually exhibited less black smearing than the VA-type LCD panel with quantum dot enhancement film found on the Samsung QN95C. Next, gaming. But before that, I would like to thank Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. Since the pandemic, some streaming providers including Netflix have throttled the bitrate of certain shows, especially in Europe, resulting in a softer picture with more compression artifacts. This is where a VPN comes in. Surfshark allows you to stream content from another country without needing you to be physically there, so you can watch Netflix at higher bitrates with better picture quality. Besides VPN, the new Surfshark One package also includes Surfshark Search, a lightweight search tool that lets you search the web without a trace. There's 24/7 live customer support, a 30-day money-back guarantee, and if you use promo code HDTV test, you'll get 3 extra months free. So sign up today and give Surfshark a try. I'll put the link in the YouTube description below. Thanks again for your support. Okay, with game mode engaged, input lag measured 18 milliseconds at 60 frames per second, halving to 9 milliseconds at 120 frames per second. The Sony X90L is still using the same MediaTek MT5895 chipset implemented on Bravo XR TVs since 2021, so only 2 out of 4 HDMI connections are HDMI 2.1 inputs, of which one is the eARC port. Both HDMI 2.1 ports carry the full HDMI 2.1 bandwidth of 48 gigabits per second, but only if you sacrifice Dolby Vision support to unlock FRL or fixed rate link signaling. New for 2023, you can summon a game menu overlay that sits at the bottom of the screen while in game mode, which, among other things, provides a toggle to engage VRR directly without having to endure the previously convoluted process that required making changes in the HDMI signal format submenu. Note that engaging VRR would lock the Sony X90L into VRR game mode, not only elevating black level, however slightly, but also increasing the input lag to 22 milliseconds and 17 milliseconds at 60 fps and 120 fps respectively, according to our Leo Butner tester. On the new game menu, motion blur reduction would be grayed out in VRR mode or with a 120Hz input source, only becoming available with a 60Hz video signal. The setting merely activated different intensities of backlight scanning, progressively darkening the picture rather than allowing for motion interpolation in game mode a la Samsung, so we disable it pretty quickly. There is also a black equalizer setting intended to expose enemies hiding in the dark, but because this would also affect even midtones, therefore washing out the image on screen, we kept it off. Thanks partly to the companion chip inside the Vrr XR processor, the Sony X90L managed to resolve full 4K 120Hz resolution despite the MediaTek MT5895 chipset, though the TV failed to reproduce full 444 chroma in HDMI 2.1 FRL mode, which also disables Dolby Vision support. So if you want to play games at 4K 120Hz, you won't be able to play in Dolby Vision at all. Like on all Vrr XR TVs, the adjust HDR settings on the PS5 would be auto-populated upon first handshake with the Sony X90L. But since the automated process would set maximum tone map luminance and maximum full frame tone map luminance at 20 clicks from minimum, which corresponds to 2000 nits, as well as minimum tone map luminance at 1 click from bottom, which would raise the black floor, the resulting HDR presentation in HDRG compliant games would look more washed out with blown out highlights. We recommend manually setting the first and second adjust HDR screens on the PS5 at 16 clicks from the bottom, and adjusting the third screen all the way down to black as always, which should provide more image depth while retaining bright highlights in HDRG compliant games. VRR worked well to reduce frame drops and tearing artifacts, and we saw less VRR flicker during more sedate scenes and on static menus than what's observed on OLED TVs, possibly helped by LED LCD's brighter black floor. Native 10-bit gradation was very good judging from this gray RAM pattern in the Display HDR app, and unlike on LG TVs, smooth gradation still worked in game mode to reduce in-game posterization, although we would refrain from going higher than the low setting to avoid an overly filtered appearance. Design-wise, the Sony X90L sits on a pair of diamond-shaped sticks, which can be installed in the wide position, the higher soundbar position, or a narrower central position. The anti-glare screen coating on the Sony X90L was semi-gloss, softening direct reflections in a diffuse manner, and unlike other LED LCD TVs with viewing angle compensation filter, thankfully it did not manifest rainbow reflections when hit by light. The Vrr X90L ships with a black remote control featuring direct access buttons to a number of streaming apps including Crunchyroll and Vrr Core. Sound quality on the 65-inch Sony X90L was decent by TV standards. Bass response and dialogue clarity were acceptable for day-to-day viewing, and the soundstage was surprisingly wide with fairly precise placement, although upper mids and treble sounded a bit shrill to our ears from time to time. To sum up, the X90L is a solid mid-range LED LCD TV, representing arguably the most significant generational upgrade within Sony's X90 LED LCD series, with higher peak brightness and more local dimming zones than last year's X90K, as well as the X90J the year before. The TV delivers more accurate colors, smoother gradation, cleaner uniformity, and superior motion than competing LED LCDs from any other brand, and so it receives our recommended award. However, hardware-wise, the Sony X90L features a VA-type LCD panel with limited viewing angles, a MediaTek HDMI 2.1 chipset with only 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, not to mention only 80 local dimming zones. And given Sony's philosophy to preserve picture accuracy including shadow detail, the Bravia X90L would naturally manifest more blooming and shallower blacks than LED LCD TVs from other manufacturers. If you want inky blacks, picture accuracy and no blooming whatsoever, all at the same time, your only choice is a self-emissive display which is capable of pixel-level light control, such as the Sony A80L OLED which I have reviewed here.